Good to see everyone in the morning. Hope you have your coffee and still awake. I'm as what my Swedish colleague or Finnish colleagues call me, a fucking Norwegian. So whenever I see them, it's always a good, nice 10-minute of banter around our heritage and culture. It's always fun. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of my, kjepphest, we call it in Norwegian, my number one priority these days. And it's making all these roadmap that we run into, or sometimes when we create, sort of run into reality, right? It's like an aircraft that seems to never be quite sure when it touches down, because the people who makes the PowerPoint don't really know what they're doing half the time. So I'm in an advisory firm, but I'm coming from the technology side, which in my point of view is where all the advisory people should be coming from, because then you sort of know what you're doing also on the tech side, which helps. So everyone seems to be talking about AI and digital transformation these days. My problem with this, and I would say the first speaker is a good example of the opposite view, because he's really talking about real stuff, is that there's a lot of people talking about stuff that's in proof of concept stage, or that's been implemented through a summer intern project, or something that's been done as sort of a isolated exercise. And whenever you ask the same people, well, is this live? Is this running? Is this, or you ask a data science person, he will be talking about his Kaggle ratings versus number of algorithms that he actually has in production. And I mean, I'm not saying that Kaggle contests are bad. I'm just saying that it's not actually helping anyone, that you're spending your time solving all the theoretical problems versus solving the actual business problems. And the business problems in these areas, in terms of how you define it, are actually quite easy, right? You have to do like one of four things, or you're not doing anything. So when you combine data, you're either doing automation, you're doing analytics, you're using the algorithms one way. But if you're not, one, improving the process efficiency, two, changing the customer experience, or making better or faster decisions, you're not really doing anything. If you haven't changed your process in one of those four ways, what have you actually accomplished? My data analytics colleagues will often say, well, we have better insights. Yeah, that's a great measurement, right? Better insights. Can you put a number of that? And then they will always say, well, we make better decisions. Really? Are you? So my challenge in this is that we see a lot of this talk about, okay, we're trying to implement it, but not enough talk about changing your process and how it's actually then meeting the reality. Now, there's an expression called data is the new oil, right? And I'm from an oil country. We're lucky that way, I guess. You're from a phone country, the Swedish are from a car country. We ended up with the oil, which was lucky. Not maybe deserve it, but anyways. But the good thing about being that, and the reason I actually like that expression, is because I worked in the upstream oil industry. And what I know is that oil can be a real pain in the ass. Right? It's expensive, it has bad quality, and sometimes you keep drilling in the wrong place. So yes, when people say data might be the new oil, it doesn't mean that all the data that you have is gold. It also means that it might be too expensive to actually utilize that data. It also means that you might not be able to change your processes to utilize that data, or with GDPR regulations, you're not able to, right? So yes, data might be the new oil, but I would also say, okay, before you start thinking that all the data that you have is gold, what are you actually going to try and accomplish, right? What are you trying to do? Are you changing your product services? Are you changing your processes? What's sort of your strategy here? And the strategy is not my competitor that's doing this that I talked to on the golf course used it in this area. What's sort of your use case? And in a lot of cases, we just see people jump into this part of the equation. Just figure out, well, this sounds like a good idea. Someone else has solved it here. We'll do the same thing for us. The second one is, well, will it fit in the organization? Are you able to change your process? So even if you can define, okay, we have a business case here, there's a solution, are you going to get your people to work in a different manner? And the third one is sort of, well, do you have the foundation to it? So we can put it in a really simple manner. It's like, first of all, do we have a business case? Do we have a real problem that we're going to solve? Okay, check. That seems to be making sense for you. If you have that, how are you going to solve it? And these days, people think everything that is hard and where we have data, you should be using machine learning. Not the case in all situations, right? You need to figure out, well, is this an appropriate situation? What's the best and efficient most solution to this problem? And the third of all, can we then change the process? So even if you found the solution, are you able to integrate it into your process? Because if you're not, you're just showing that, well, we have a proof of concept that technologically could solve the problem, but people aren't going to use it anyway. They're not going to trust it. Right? And then it's not really going to help. Not in real life. In theory it will. In the PowerPoint it will. In the business case that people seems to have forgotten, it will. But it doesn't actually help if you're not getting the people on board. Right? And then the final part is, well, once you have it live, up and running, integrated into your production system, are you then going to be able to operate it? Are you then going to be able to trust it? Are you then going to be able to change it? So this is all the internal setup and sort of very, very basic things on just before you get started. So I'll spend the majority of the time, and I have like 14 minutes left if I can manage to keep on to it, on talking about a use case, on how you applied it with a real client instead. And this is sort of what we see a lot of the time. People have some nice business case that they haven't really thought into, and then their solution is not really using AI. They just needed to say that, because of course everyone has to be doing AI these days. If you're not doing AI, it's like you're not doing cloud 10 years ago. So there seems to be this KPI about number of newsletters you get written about your company, right? So anyways, again, a little bit about the approach. We call it, you can call it pretty much what you want, but we call it a digital assessment. A digital assessment is pretty common sense. It's basically looking at, okay, what are you doing currently within the digital space and where do you want to go? So that's sort of your gap. What are the best practices out there that's running this? How do you educate the organization? How do you look at the processes? And how does that end up with a roadmap and actions? And I'll walk you through some of the case slides on sort of how we moved into this. But the key elements are digital maturity and the gap, pretty basic stuff. You close that gap with actions or use cases. And for each of the use cases, you need an action plan on getting it into real life. And of course, with each use case, you need to figure out, okay, what are we going to earn with this? How long is it going to take us? And what does it require? So a little bit more. First of all, with this organization, we needed to figure out, okay, what does AI and digital actually mean in terms of value? And you would think it's a very basic question, but actually we ended up with quite a big of a discussion with them because, well, going digital doesn't really mean anything. Well, it means that you've gone digital, but what the hell does that mean in terms of value, right? So they needed to fill out that they were quite clear that in terms of value, we need to crystallize that in terms of, well, yes, money, profits, save cost, etc., but also some other dimensions, right? So productivity, and I do apologize, this was a Norwegian client, so some of the slides beneath will be Norwegian, but I'll explain it. So productivity, compliance, this was an energy company, so compliance with them also means you don't kill the salmon that's in the river. Norwegian also, deal with salmon, so we're quite occupied. We do water production and we do salmon. If you produce too much water, you kill the salmon. Bad business, bad PR, etc. Also, of course, conscious about sustainability, conscious about, okay, how can we save time for the employees and increase quality of production? So basic, dimensions that you put up there, but together with the cost benefit in terms of number of kroners, in our case, actually saved. Now, okay, once we've sort of agreed to this is where we're going, we started and iterate through this process, right? So we quickly found out that when the client asked us, they were, and coming from the tech side, of course, this is fun, because they said, can you help us to figure out what we can do with robotics, machine learning, AI, advanced analytics, drones, 3D printing, and etc. And we're like, This is our like dream list of technology, but are you sure you're actually going to need it? Once we got into the project, we quickly realized that, okay, we can sort of put the advanced stuff on the shelf for a little bit, because what they needed was not the same thing that they wanted straight away. So in order to sort of come to that realization, we had different groups, and there's a reason for that. So we have the sort of the top management groups, which you may all know are a bit high-flying some of the times. So they needed to be educated in terms of what the technology means and what other companies are doing. So what were the use cases, for example, in energy related to AI? Well, predictive asset maintenance, right? Predictive maintenance sort of being the big thing in asset-heavy industries. Also using other tool sets, in this case AR, using drones, using other types of advanced analytics into the mix. But when you talk to the people that's working in the actual plants, whether that's water production or heating production, you can't come with fancy shit that they don't understand and can't see how they fit into production. So you have to sort of merge this top-down best practice approach with a bottom-up, what are you actually going to experience in your daily life, right? So although top management might like to see, a fancy video of what Siemens is doing in a top-level factory in Germany, when you talk to someone in Rakkestad, in the middle of nowhere in Norway, right, you can't come with that shit. They will shoot you down before you get on the floor, right? These people are more occupied with, their old American car than whatever, you have of modern trends. So you sort of have to balance this approach, and you have to get people on board. So it's a mix of doing, yes, what are the best practices that are out there, but what's also then going to fit in your organization. So when you've actually done a bit of basic training, you can then sort of start running these sessions, which is saying, okay, look, you have this level of maturity. Do we all agree on that? And this part of the organization, they had different levels. Then you can start really working into it, saying, okay, what type of technology is actually going to make a difference for you, and why do you think it's going to make a difference? Now, our original thinking was as follows. We'll do the best practices. Every consulting company loves having best practices, right? Who's leading edge in your field? And then we'll take that use case and start discussing it. Now, we quickly decided that we needed a bullshit filter between in there. So what we did is basically we took all the production sites, and then we found sort of their most forward-leaning person, and we say, look, here's a case. This seems to be working for another energy company. They're doing approximately the same. They're using advanced monitoring, predictive maintenance on the assets. Is this going to work for you? Right? And sometimes the case was like, yeah, this is cool. This you can talk about, this seems to be relevant. And other times it was, well, this case, no, don't mention it, because we've outsourced it to another provider, or our infrastructure is this and this, or this case won't fit because part of our production is running in a different manner. So we sort of took that top-down, next level generation part, but not stretch more than where they were, but a little bit. And then we filtered it with some of the employees, and then we went and ran the bottom-up workshops. And then it's a lot more easier, right? Because every example then you then put on the floor and ask them to discuss, they will see it as like, well, it's a bit forward from what we're doing, but it's not like they're talking about Venus and we're on Mars, right? So it's relatable to them in a different way. Once you sort of can get them to relate, then you can start talking about their processes. So that means going into, well, what are we actually doing each day, and how can we change that? How can we use this new technology and these components that we now filter down to them and sort of change and looking at, okay, how do we implement it? And this is where people then, if you're doing it well, people will start to get engaged. If you're doing it badly at this point, people will sit in their chair, roll their eyes, and like, oh yeah, it's some consultants talking, asshole speak again. So it was sort of a critical path to see that we're both hitting the audience in terms of what the top management central people would be doing, and also what the local production guys would be doing. And the guys speaking, you can also see a bit of a difference, right? Because the top pictures are from Frankfurt, on this fancy workshop table, which of course very modern. And then you have the production guy at the back, in the middle of nowhere, running a local workshop. And all of these people then need to get a common picture on where we're going. And when you figure out where you're going, it's not doing one thing, right? It's doing a series of things. So this is where the roadmap comes into play, sort of showing, okay, what actions are we going to align? And I'll show you the details between all of this, because that took some time, to put it frankly. First of all, they started with a 3-year roadmap in this case, right? So we quite quickly figured out that there's no point in planning 3 years in detail in advance, because in 1.5 years or 1 year, something won't go according to plan. I've never met a plan that survived contact with reality ever, right? Shit always changes during the way. Technology is going to change, the maturity is going to change, or the implementation didn't go as planned. So what we basically said that, look, for the first year, we'll make a quite detailed plan of the use cases, how we implement it, etc., with weeks, with actions, etc. After 1 year, there's a buffer period you will sort of see before the yellow space here, where we say, okay, look, how have we gone along, implemented the first set of use cases, what went as expected, what did not go as expected. Now, in that period, we will then evaluate what we call level 2 use cases, more advanced stuff, and then start picking those down and doing the detailed level 2 phases. But it also makes the planning exercise a bit easier, right? Because if you're like me, you don't like spending hours and hours doing Gantt charts and process charts and all of this. You like to get stuff started. So we said, okay, we'll focus on the use cases for the first coming year. These have a very detailed timeline and implementation path. And then after 1 year, we'll revisit the roadmap and sort of start picking on level 2 use cases. Now, this level 2, level 1 separation also means that we had a maturity statement in terms of the digital dimensions after 1 year, and then we sort of have another ambition of where we're going to be 1.5 later after that. And of course, 3 years is still a stretch, but when you divide it in 2, 1 year actually goes quite quickly, and it's sort of clear to the organization where they want to do. Now, this is actually where the homework starts because below this, for each of these use cases, right, we had stuff like this, 2-pagers, which basically says, what are we going to accomplish in terms of the process? What type of technology do we need to get the data? What type of information do we need in order to have that new process? And what does it mean in terms of change management and competency for the people? Then that's sort of the blue row in the middle. At the bottom level, you got cost. How much it's going to cost us, estimated in terms of times in investments. What will it require in terms of risks? What will it provide in terms of value? And sort of what's the total evaluation? And for all the level 1 use cases, we needed to do this work as well, which is basically the action plan for the organization to implement it. So once they decided that, okay, we're going to put this on the roadmap, it will take these people X amount of time to implement it. Of course, it's an estimate, but it does mean that you have sort of an action plan to go, not just a PowerPoint that shows some nice figures, right? Of course, doing this will require quite a bit of homework, research, and it's sort of a painful exercise, especially when you find some really nice use cases, but I'm like, I can't get the money to show up. I can't get the use case to show up. I love it from a technology perspective, but we can't, for the life of us, get anyone to show how it's going to get value from it. We had a really nice case with a digital twin of this whole water pipe, and the guy who was in charge of it was like, this will be really cool. And I'm like, yes, but can you try and tell me how you're going to work better because of it? And we couldn't. So at least it was on hold for level 2, to put it that way. We also then decided or identified that in order to support this, we need sort of a digital platform. A digital platform, nothing more fancy that, okay, in the core you have typically your FTV or ERP systems. Then we extended out, okay, with different levels of automation, different levels of analytics, predictions, and data visualization that we sort of wrap around that. And then we said for level 1 use cases, this is the level 1 capabilities that you needed to have in place. For level 2 use cases, we needed to extend a little bit more. But it also means that it's not a build and the use cases will come approach. It's here is what you want to do. Here's the value that's going to come of that. This is the platform that you will require in order to accomplish that. So we sort of flipped it on its head to make sure that we're actually now realizing that when we're working together with them. And of course, that's the hard part of it. And I don't have more than 20 seconds left, so I can't tell you about all the design and implementation. But this is basically how to figure out how to do the right things. And it's not rocket scientists, right? It's all perfectly commonly reasonable-based questions. It just requires a little bit of homework, but also it requires understanding the organization. So thank you.